Good evening, everyone. On behalf of Vicky, Women's Indian Chapter of Commerce and Industry, Delhi Sustainable Business Council, I welcome all of you to the second conversation on native trees of Delhi. Vicky, Delhi Sustainable Business Council is the apex body for sustainable businesses for women in the state of Delhi. Delhi Sustainable Business Council envisions to bring about fundamental changes in governmental policies, laws, and incentives with a view to encourage and empower women in sustainable business, industry, and commerce across all sectors and fields. It aims to enable individuals, communities, and businesses to work together to create a vibrant, healthy, and sustainable Delhi. Wiki DSPC achieves its three-pronged mission to research, empower, advocate through the following three verticals: facts, not fiction, which aims to spread data-driven knowledge and expertise on sustainable business practices through webinars, fireside chats, research paper, and case study publications. Rise and Shine, which looks at empowering women-led sustainable businesses by providing an aggregating platform through networking events, through networking events, internships, etc. Nudge for Change, which is the advocacy vertical, which will draft actionable policy briefs and nudge relevant stakeholders towards more sustainable practices. Wiki DSPC has been organizing several awareness programs, and we have actually sort of planned it in such a way that we cover all aspects of air, water, and land. And this quarter, we are dedicating more to water and land in terms of, monsoon being around the corner. We thought that probably it would be good to cover on plantations. So we started the series on native trees of Delhi last week with our member, Vallari Sheel. Vallari is an urban ecologist, urban gardener, and urban farmer. Vallari is currently pursuing her PhD in urban ecology from North Carolina State University, USA, studying the role of urban trees in Delhi from ecological and sociocultural perspectives. She is fascinated by nature in the city and spends an inordinate amount of time with the birds, bees, butterflies, plants, and trees around us, observing and enjoying them. She has an annual pop-up native plant nursery in her house where she grows native plants from seeds and distributes the saplings for plantation across the city. She has been engaging her neighborhood community, including school children, into doing a tree census of the street trees of her colony and has logged over 5,000 trees in their database information that is crucial for the conservation of street trees. Thank you, Vallari, so much for joining us today and for taking this conversation forward. Joining with Vallari are two experts, Fazal Rashid and Somil Daga. Both of them are from Edible Roots. So I will hand over to Vallari to take this conversation forward. Over to you, Vallari.
Thank you, Fazia. And I'm so excited to have both Fazal and Somil with us here today. I met Somil last year sometime during a walk, and I was so taken aback with his knowledge of native plants. And then I kept after him. I was like, can you tell me about this plant? Can you tell me about that plant? Can you tell me how to grow plants? Can you tell me where I will find this plant? And it's been like amazing learning from him. He's been, he's so free with sharing his knowledge. So thank you, Somil, for joining us today. And I met Fazal only a few days back, although I'd been hearing about him so much, especially from Padma, who kept telling me, you must talk to Fazal, you must meet him, you must, connect with him, learn from him. And so I'm really glad that, Fazal, you were also able to join us today. So we will get started, and I'll just go through a couple of housekeeping rules before we start. So we will just keep everyone on mute because there are so many participants and it becomes difficult to manage everything. Please do write down your questions and queries and anything you want to discuss in the chat box. We will take it up either during our discussion or towards the end during a Q&A. And we might even, depending on time, we can unmute participants and allow them to ask their questions towards the end. And I'm hoping that we will be done by 7, but if we go on for a few minutes beyond that, do stay with us. I think it will be the Q&A towards the end. So we would love to answer everybody's questions and queries. And you can follow Vicky on these social media sites. And you can also write to us with any queries. In case we are unable to answer your questions right away, do feel free to write into us so we can connect you to Fazal, Somil, or anybody else, or any other resource person who can get back to your queries. And before we get started, there was an interesting observation about the creative for today. So I want to share that. It was pointed out to me that, all the plants in this creative are non-native. And I said, oh, yes, they are non-native. And I said, oh, but, we took our creative license and we put them in. But it made me think, we are so used to these plants, we see them all around us, we recognize them, at least as common house plants, even though we may not know their names. But how many of us can identify or recognize our native plants, plants that we are supposed to know? Very few of us would probably know about that. So that was just an interesting observation that a senior ecologist had, and a thought that came to mind that, we have to get so adept with our native plants as well that, they become so common and we are able to recognize them and have them everywhere around us. And it's, as Fauziya said, monsoons have started. There's usually like a planting frenzy for us because monsoons are probably one of the only seasons in India where you can plant for the whole year, especially in Delhi, because Delhi has dry weather throughout. And so part of doing this series is to understand what are the right plants to plant here in the Delhi NCR region. And today I'm really excited to have both Fazal and Somil because they will also teach us something about how we can grow our own plants and our own native plants. So over to both of you. And I actually want to start with one question, which is, what are native plants and why should we be talking about native plants?
Fazal, would you like to take that?
Yeah, sure. So native plants are plants that have evolved over hundreds, over thousands, over millions of years in a specific climate, in a specific soil type, in a specific place. So they know how to survive in a place and they know very well how to do it, especially without humans. So why we're talking about native plants now is so much of our horticulture, primarily influenced by how the British practiced their horticulture when they ruled this country, is influenced by horticulture from pre-independence times that we've completely forgotten, for the most part, what native species existed in the places or should exist in the places where we live. So I guess, yeah, if a good test for a native plant versus non-native could even be, if you don't recognize it, it's probably native. So if you completely don't recognize it. So yeah, that's what.
That was a very good point. I completely agree with you, Fazal, over there.
If it's completely unfamiliar, forget recognize. If it's completely,
That's so true. Somil, would you like to add something here?
I mean, I don't have much more to add as to what native plants are, but just the same idea that when I started learning about plants and trees and I got my hands on trees of Delhi, basically that's how I started. And I met Fazal actually, and he was already into this. the idea dawned on me that, hey, just outside my window in my house, there are these plants that exist, and they've existed here for such a long time, even before any of us were probably, here, and any humans before they inhabited Delhi. In fact, these plants have been here, and suddenly, um, in just a few years, a century or 2 centuries, when we are ruled by, the British, this, these plants, they just completely go out of our sight and we forget about them. Um, so just it was amazing to just see ki, acha, you're going through these plants, and there are some plants that have been planted in Delhi, some plants that have been here for the longest of time. And what is it that one can do, to bring them back? That's it. And it's the other one more point I want to say is that it's absolutely essential now to garden and to plant with native trees and shrubs and grasses, because there is definitely an impending water crisis that it's perhaps not even impending anymore. And native plants, um, because they have evolved to adapt and thrive in the very ecology and climate that Delhi has. You just have to plant them and tend to them for a few months, and then just let them be, and they'll be at home, and they'll add some value.
Huh.
Yeah. So we have to sort of look towards them, protect them, grow them, and love them a bit more.
Yeah, that was interesting. I think, the idea of the Britishers kind of replacing our native vegetation is an important one. I think what we often find or see in Lutyens Delhi are a lot of species that were imported by the British from other countries, perhaps, or even other regions of India. And you also mentioned trees of Delhi, and I think that is literally like the holy Bible for all of us, including me, because that's where all our journeys, with these plants started. And I would be interested in hearing for both of you, how did your plant journey start? How did your native plant journey start? Somil, you mentioned trees of Delhi, but where from there, where? Where did it take you? How did it bring you to native plants?
Honestly, actually, I don't remember what was the exact moment when I realized that, there is this whole thing about native and non-native. But I quickly now open my presentation, because I'll just tell you what's the first thing we did when we started learning about these plants. Um, just let me share my screen. Yeah, so here's the bit about my the nursery project, which basically started. Yeah. So this is basically our first nursery our only nursery, but this is where we started our nursery, and this is a farm in Ayanagar where Edible Roots was based for 3 years. And this nursery, it's a very small thing, and it was basically a result of some projects we had got at that time of developing farmhouses in and around Delhi to plant orchards and to plant some functional trees like biomass trees or nitrogen fixing trees and shade giving trees, etc. And there were a bunch of these projects, and we thought the best way to do is just to order a truck load of trees from Uttar Pradesh and another truckload of trees from Rajasthan, and just get them together and then use them and plant them out. And so we ordered half of them from Rajasthan and half of them from Uttar Pradesh, and this is what you're seeing right now. And essentially, what Fazal and I would do whenever we had some free time after site visit or a project, we'd go and explore Aravali Biodiversity Park, or we'd go and explore Sanjay Van, or we'd go and explore, Mangarbani. often if we see some trees in flower and fruit, we pick up some ripe fruits and then bring them back and then just grow them in this nursery. Um, so what you're seeing here is basically a result of these three things. And that's how our journey with plants, with native plants actually started. And we started realizing that, hey, some of the plants we've ordered from Uttar Pradesh you'll find in all nurseries in Delhi, but some of them that we got from Rajasthan, nobody's growing them right now. So can we focus just on that? And we did that, and luckily that year somehow we got an order of native plants because someone was planting a forest somewhere, and they said, hey, you have these 500 trees of these species. Said, yeah, hey, please come take it from us. And then whatever money we got from selling those plants, we put it back into the nursery, and we started developing it more. We made raised beds, we made these kyaris, we expanded it. And eventually, 1 year later, here we are. This is in Kalindi Kunj. We had to basically shift our nursery out of another. And today we are growing more than 12 to 15,000 plants of maybe 40, 50 different species of not just trees now, but also getting into shrubs and some climbers. And we are thinking that we should now also pay some attention to grasses. But basically, it was a mix of just some keen interest and I would say a fortunate stroke of serendipity when people started just buying some of these trees and we could self-sustain the nursery. And we continue that till date. I mean, we just have, basically we have 2 half employees in the nursery who spend half their time every day in the nursery and the rest of the time they do something else. And all the things that we generate from the nursery go back into it to expand it and to take care of it. So yeah, I mean, that's very briefly about, and you've been to this nursery.
Yeah, and I went there yesterday as well, and it's beautiful. It was hard to reach it yesterday because there was so much traffic, which I did not anticipate at all. But it's such a beautiful place, and for anybody and everybody interested in native plants and seeing how they grow or learning to grow them, I would definitely recommend a visit over there to see how it's done. Should be done, can be done.
Right.
So I think that was just amazing. Fazal, like Somil mentioned that there were lots of plants that you initially got from Rajasthan that you were not finding in nurseries in Delhi. And do you remember what those plants were? That was an interesting point. I think I picked up that plants from UP you find in Delhi, plants from Rajasthan not so much. And maybe we'll talk about Delhi's ecosystems also next, the types of habitats that Delhi has. Maybe some of them are closer, to the Rajasthan landscape more than probably the UP landscape. I don't know. Just putting the thought out there.
No, that was something different. The plants, it just so happened that the bigger wholesale nurseries of cultivated plants that we wanted are in UP. So that's why it wasn't that we were getting native plants of UP from UP. So, but some of the trees were Jal, Pilu, Khejdi, Vajradanti, Adusa. Those were some of the plants that we were looking for, but just could not find anywhere in Delhi. And we knew that you won't find them because we had talked to people like Pradeep and asked them where those plants were available.
Fazal,
Right.
would you like to get into the microhabitats of Delhi?
Huh. Yes, do tell us. So, one of the things is that we kind of tend to think of areas as like these homogeneous, everything is the same. Just, one size fits all. But that is not really true. And Delhi is a great example for that because Delhi has so many different kinds of ecosystems, microhabitats, embedded in it. So do tell us something about that, because that also impacts what we plant, where we plant, and how we plant or should plant.
Bilkul. But before that, I'll ask a question. When is the best time to plant a tree? When was the best time to plant a tree?
Is that a trick question? Let's ask if some of the participants want to answer. If someone can raise their hands, I can unmute them.
Yesterday, someone is saying in the chat box, Snehla.
Yeah, it was
Now.
yesterday, now.
Monsoon generally.
Mhm.
So I think yesterday is the closest answer, but the answer to this question is 20 years ago.
Well, now that's, if only we had a time machine, right?
When is the second best time to plant a tree is now. But also in terms of planning for planting in the monsoon, now is not the time to think about it at all. Your planning for monsoon planting should be happening probably by around Jan, Feb. All your planning should be done, and you're procuring if you're serious about tree planting, if you're serious about any planting, your planning for the monsoon should easily be done by January. And by Feb, you should have your complete detailed lists and kind of should be procuring plants by Feb, March. So,
and then how do we get them through the summers?
You take care, you water them. I mean, like a nursery, any nursery. Or at least you have them booked wherever. Matlab, you pay your advance, you keep them at the nursery where they'll take care of them till June. But you should be fully ready for planting with everything by latest for Delhi by June.
Right.
And
Somil?
one of the things that someone, when they found out that, we have this native plants nursery, they told us last year in June that next year in 2021, we'll be taking 2,000 plants of these species from you. Can you please prepare them for us? You're like, hell yes, like, come on, this is what we want, because we already know that, these are the plants that these people want, and we know how to grow them. Let's grow them, keep them in a nursery for 1 year. And that's when it's best to plant out a sapling, when it's 1 year old, being taken care of in the nursery. So actually, with native plants, you might even want to start earlier than March or Feb that year, because you won't find all the plants that you need. Sorry,
yeah, no, and that's an important point. So for all of us, that after this session we should start planning for next year and figure out what we want to grow, where we want to grow, and what we can do, right? So that's a really, really good point.
Okay. Shall we dive into the microhabitat?
Yes, please.
So I'll just share my screen and present. So understanding Delhi's ecology. Now, one of the points I'm going to try to make in these next few slides is that ecology should actually be ecologies. It's not singular, it's plural. Now, Delhi itself has different, what are called microhabitats. Well, what's a microhabitat? A microhabitat is a change, any kind of change in the landscape that results in the change in the plants that grow in that landscape. So to put it very simply, where there's ridge, where there's Aravlis, that microhabitat is different from the area next to the Yamuna. Now, what that means is that the plants grow differently. And so if you're living, for example, in Vasant Kunj, or if you, and the place of, I have heard multiple people in the Vasant Kunj, various sectors saying, we're in a very rocky place. We've tried planting gulmohar for many years. We've replanted, we water them, but they still die. It's because the plants you need are the plants adapted for the Aravali microhabitat in Delhi. We'll get to that specifically. So this photograph is in Sikar. This is again in the Aravlis. And just to give you a sense of the different kinds of microhabitats that exist. One is, of course, the hills, shallow soils, gradients. You have slope, water drains very easily. Next, you have plain areas. If you look a little lower in this area of the photo, the planting gets a lot greener and dense. That's because there's more moisture there. All the moisture goes down whenever it rains. And then, so let's get into Delhi's microhabitats now. The first one is called Bangar. Does anyone, Vallari, you know what a Bangar microhabitat is?
I'm the weakest with microhabitats. I only understand a little bit of the Aravalis because
Right.
I live in a similar area, and because that's the most talked about microhabitat for Delhi,
Yeah.
But I think the others are not so well understood.
Yeah, because, and probably the reason is that around Delhi at least, Bangar microhabitat has been completely destroyed. There is nowhere in or around Delhi where you will find an old Bangar forest. So Bangar is the forest of the plains, the forest that existed in the past in the plains, where there's deep soil and moisture close to the surface, close to the ground level. So the current areas in Delhi now that are part of a Bangar, that would have formed part of the old Bangar habitat, is more all of New Delhi, where we have New Delhi now. Shalimar Bagh, further north of Shalimar Bagh, very fertile area. These are, and the reason they don't exist now are twofold. One is the prime agricultural land, deep soil, water level very high. So all Bangar forests, at least around Delhi, finished. Might interest some of you to know Connaught Place was a babool forest. Babool is one of the kind of emblematic species of a Bangar habitat. Here you can see, this is actually not a photograph from Delhi, but it can give you a sense of what a Bangar habitat would look like. You can see, if any of you recognize these, so hills at the back coming down here, plain suddenly, deeper soils, lots of grasses, open canopied forest, lots of babool here, a tree that's quite similar to babool on the left called ronge. Other trees from a Bangar habitat would be jal and pilu, bistendu. So that's your Bangar habitat, deep soils. And if any of you live in those areas, then those might be the kinds of trees you want to look towards planting. Lots of grasses as well. That's one important part of a Bangar habitat. So again, I urge you all not just to think of trees. That's too easy. It's just too easy. Let's go a little bit deeper.
That's a really, really beautiful photo. I mean, I don't think I've seen a Bangar habitat like this. And I also didn't realize Ranch was for the Bangar habitat. I always assumed it was for the Kohi, the Aravali area.
Ronge is actually a very versatile tree. I wouldn't place it as being very specific to any microhabitat. It's one of those kind of all-rounders where you'll see in Bangar and Kohi. So moving on from Bangar, this is Khadar. Now Khadar is the riverine or the riparian habitat, microhabitat. Anything, basically the Yamuna flows through Delhi, or what used to be the Yamuna now flows through Delhi. And the trees that grew along the Yamuna, the Arjun, the Jhau, various reeds and grasses that love to grow in lots of moisture. This image you're seeing here has lots of Arjun. They almost grow as a monodominant species in this kind of habitat just because they're so well adapted to growing along perennial watercourses. This again is not Delhi. No surprise there. Khadar habitat as well does not exist anywhere in or around Delhi, just because it's all been cut primarily for agriculture. Here's another image of what a Khadar habitat probably looked like, even near Delhi, although this is not from Delhi. Perennial water, trees growing along it, lots of Arjun. There are other species as well. The jamun is very much a riparian tree that grows along rivers all over India. In fact, there's an interesting story now. When the British planted up New Delhi, they wanted evergreen trees. And what they observed is that the jamun is an evergreen tree in the Indian forest. But what they didn't possibly, because I guess they were thinking of it in a very reductionist way that, oh, just the tree. Yes, it's evergreen. Therefore, if we pull it out of context and place it in Delhi, it'll still remain evergreen. But they didn't even look down and see that, oh, it's growing next to a perennial stream. Maybe that's why it's evergreen in that context. So when they planted it in Delhi, in a completely dry context, it started behaving deciduous.
That must have been a big shock for them.
Yeah, I guess. So Bangar is the habitat of deep soils. Khadar is the habitat next to any perennial waterway, but in Delhi specifically, perennial streams. Our nursery is in a Khadar habitat right next to the Yamuna. Of course, that habitat doesn't exist. And Madanpur Khadar, there are a lot of villages along the Yamuna that actually have the name Khadar. Many villages in UP actually have the name Bangar attached to them. So it's something to keep in mind. And people who speak Hindi as a first language understand these words as words that just denote exactly what they are, a kind of ecology. So moving on from Khadar is our most famous habitat in Delhi, the Kohi. Koh in Persian means mountain. And so Kohi means the hilly habitat. And these are not these Hindi words, Urdu words, whatever you want to call them, Kohi, Bangar, Khadar, these are actually from Mughal times. These were words used to denote an administrative unit. And whether you owned land on Kohi, Bangar, or Khadar, they knew how productive that land would be, and therefore you would have to pay tax accordingly. So Kohi land was considered what's called Ghair Mumkin Pahar, where you can't do agriculture. So obviously your tax would probably be nil. Whereas if you owned lots of Bangar land, you had to pay lots of tax. That's where these terms come from. They were administrative terms, I think, that were created in Akbar's time, that I'll have to verify. But these are pre-British terms. So this is
wasn't Raisina Hill also a part of Ghair Mumkin Pahad, or am I wrong on that?
No, Ghair Mumkin Pahar was just an administrative term used to designate an area where you can't do agriculture. So it must have been if it was a rocky hill. This is photograph. Do any of you know where this photograph is of? This is yes. Who is that?
Right. Urvana.
Urvana, have you been?
No, I'm really planning to go. I'm in touch with Mr. Harsana for it, and he keeps sharing his success stories. Grateful to be just witnessing this.
Superb. Yeah. So this is the last surviving probably old growth native tree habitat, primary forest, uncut by humans, near Delhi. You can find Aravali primary habitat elsewhere, but near Delhi, it's just about probably 1 hour or so from Vasant Kunj, 45 minutes to an hour from a place like Vasant Kunj on the Gurgaon Faridabad road. And it's when you go there, you can feel as though you're alongside a wise old person. You can feel, and you can see the beauty, of course. So this is your Kohi habitat. And if you're in Vasant Kunj, if you're in parts of North Delhi, if you have a farmhouse in a rocky area on the MG road, you're probably in a Kohi habitat, and you're probably best planting trees from the hills. So so these are our three primary microhabitats in Delhi: Bangar, Khadar, Kohi. There is also a fourth, which I won't be talking about, which is the Dabar, which was a place that flooded post-monsoon, primarily now composed of Najafgarh, that area around Najafgarh. But we won't talk about that because that place has been so drastically changed because of the damming of certain water courses that flooded that entire area that it's not so much of significance probably in this conversation.
So Fazal, we do have a question. Shabda is asking, is this the right time to go to Mangar?
Any time is the right time to go to Mangar. Anytime. It's best you get in touch with a guy like Sunil Harsana, who she mentioned, because you need someone to guide you there and kind of take you in. And he's one of the local people who've been protecting this forest, who've mobilized people from their village and are protecting this it's a couple of hundred acres. And Gurgaon is rapidly expanding southwards towards it. So yes, it's really worth connecting with this place and connecting with this last remaining sacred forest. The reason it remains is that there's a story associated with this temple here of Gadariya Baba, that even if a goat herd or anyone inside picked up even one stick, then lightning would strike him or something terrible would happen to that person. So the villagers have been protecting it against a lot of pressure and a lot of construction lobby type people trying to get the Haryana government to somehow give permission to flatten this place. So for microhabitats, that's what I have. Shall I stop sharing my screen?
Sure. That was really very, very informative, especially learning about Jamun and Arjun. They seem to be two of our favorite trees. But, understanding that they prefer a certain microhabitat. So, they might not do so well if they're planted in, for example, the rocky terrain and other areas in and around Delhi.
Yeah, I think, Vallari, if you notice this new road they've built along on that Chhatarpur Metro Road that leads to Aruna Asif Ali Marg and all the other Vasant Kunj pockets, they've planted a whole lot of Arjun there recently in the last 3 years. And we've actually observed them growing and they're not doing too bad. But I guess the point is that how long do you want to go on watering these trees? Those Arjuns will probably be watered. I don't know for how many years, but maybe even for all their life. And even if they grow very large, you stop the watering, they may slowly die. But you don't want that. You just want to put your tree in and in some sense plant it in monsoon, maybe take care of it for 6 months to a year, and then you want the tree to take care of you. That's the objective.
The other point to add to that is that maybe the Arjun will survive. Maybe it will not die, but it will never be the giant it can be that when it's in a Khadar habitat, and that's when its real beauty will come across. Like we've seen, for example, Mitragaina pavifolia, the kadam tree. And I think Vallari, you were there for that walk when Pradeep took us inside. You remember that camp that was just at home in that seasonal stream that probably gushes down just for 2 months in the monsoon. And it was like the biggest camp I've ever seen, 80 feet in height. It was so at home over there. But if you perhaps to take it out from there and plant it just 50 meters up the hill where we were inside the ridge, it will not be anything close to that. So you have to give those trees their original home to really see them in full bloom, and their original how an old growth tree, like you'll know you're planting right when you see after 20 years that this tree has become something. So
one analogy I like to give people is it's like keeping a Saint Bernard in Delhi or maybe even in Jodhpur or Rajasthan. That dog, why are you running an AC to keep that dog alive? Matlab, it's not comfortable. It's never going to flourish or be completely happy in a place where it's completely not adapted to live with all its fur. It's that kind. It's a similar kind of situation.
And I think it's important because, see, what has been done, what's been planted has been planted. But from now on, if we can understand our different habitats, our microhabitats, and plant accordingly, we'll also get different plant communities through the city, right? It will be so much fun. It's like, you get different vegetables in summers and winters. And so you wait for them, like you are eagerly waiting for the best mangoes and the best, carrots. Of course, you can get frozen carrots through the year, but what's the fun in that? You want the lovely winter carrots. And so I think in some way, like having these different kinds of planting palettes through the city where everything, it's not the same, it's not like this monoculture or a homogeneous thing, because we have so many kinds of habitats. Let's plant, according to the habitat. Let's get different varieties of trees, shrubs, grasses in there, and uh, enjoy what they can bring in, enjoy that variety that can be there. I think that's an important one.
And it's also important to understand, I think somebody also in their comments mentioned that it's the old alluvial plain, and this is what reminded me about it, that basically the Bangar habitat is, basically Yamuna has shifted its course east where it is right now. It was almost up till the ridge, where the ridge starts, the southern ridge. The Yamuna actually thousands of years ago was flowing here over next to the ridge, southern ridge, and then it slowly shifted its course. So Bangar is actually the old alluvium deposit of the Yamuna itself, and Khadar is the new deposit. And it's important because it's rich because it's deposit from the Yamuna, which originates from the Himalayas, and it's brought in all those minerals and silt along with it, and that's why Bangar is so rich, and it has deeper soils, and it has a particular community of plants. So it's important to really understand the history and the evolution of these things, to really get to know that how important it is to plant right and how plants co-evolved with that ecology.
Vallari, there are a couple of questions in the chat, so I will just read them out. So Shaila is asking, I tried to grow crassula twice, but I fail. Any suggestions for Rajasthan native plants? I hope I have pronounced the species correctly.
Actually, we're just moving on to talking about, growing plants. So we'll take this question up there. But
There's one more question
yes.
on wastewater. So recycled water can evolve recycled water all year round, ideal for planting when needed season wise. Can we do that? Wastewater?
So can we use wastewater for, can we plant, for example, outside of the monsoons and use recycled water or wastewater? And how will our plantation do then?
It depends. If it's properly treated through whatever system you're using to treat it, yes, of course. But if there's still heavy metals in the water and lots of salts, then you don't want to be.
Also, what about the climate, Fazal? Because you can't just plant randomly in every climate, right? So is climate an important factor to keep in mind when we are planting?
You mean
apart from
season?
water? Season, yes.
Actually, you can, I think, plant in Delhi if few conditions. You plant native and you plant right. You mulch properly, and you have someone who can water the plant till the incoming monsoon. You certainly can plant in the second half of Feb and first half of March in Delhi, if these three conditions are met.
Yeah, it's also something probably not recommended if someone is doing a large scale plantation over a huge area. Then you should definitely stick to the monsoon or just the pre-monsoon time to plant your plants, because then you'll be just watering like mad if you plant over a huge area. But if you're just planting a few trees, then it's okay to plant throughout the year. In fact.
Okay. And we do have questions about plant communities for each of the habitats that you talked about, Fazil. So can you talk about a little bit about those plant communities? And the other thing that we'll do is we can put together a resource document to share with people, because these are questions that come up quite often. Like people want to know, okay, what are the different kinds of grasses, shrubs, trees we can plant in these kind of habitats and areas. So maybe like a quick run through, and then we can put together a document that we could circulate later.
So yeah, I can run you through some images of trees that are appropriate, and part of the objective there will be to inspire you by those photos. They're just some nice photos of beautiful trees. But before I get into that, Somil, in case you have to leave, do you have something to, you have to leave early?
Yeah, I have to.
Do you want to talk now then?
No, I mean, I have time. I can be here till 7:15. So.
Perfect. We'll close off at 7:15, don't worry.
Okay, then I'll show you some photos and just say a sentence or two about some of those trees. So more just to kind of spark an interest than to give you some in-depth information. So this was just my follow on photo from, this is what the Aravali should be, and this is what they are now. One of the main reasons to really think deeply about native plants and planting right, and because so much of the Aravali is in front of our eyes is being mined, developed, but that's, do we want to touch upon invasive species, Abhi?
Up to you guys. We do want to learn, get some tips from you about growing plants.
I'll just quickly, actually run through some of the plants that should be planted in Delhi now. This is, so that picture of Mangar Bunny from on top, this is the picture from inside, in more or less the same season in the monsoon. Now the tree you can see here, mostly, this is one single species, and this is a rare occurrence in nature. This is a monodominant habitat of this tree called Dhaw, or Anogeisys pendula. Now what's really amazing about this photograph is that all these different trees, individuals you see here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, there's a very good chance that they're all actually one organism. Because the way the dhaw is adapted to growing in this kind of a very, very rocky habitat is by cloning, what's called cloning. So it sends out a root, a horizontal root or a stolon, and then from there a new tree shoots out of the ground. So the dhaws right on top of the hill, they can access moisture through the trees they're connected through all the way at the bottom, for example, or some minerals. So all these trees here could be one organism. So if someone ever asks you which is the largest living organism in the world, it's not a blue whale. It's probably a dhaw or some other clonal tree.
Bigger than the banyan in the Kolkata
No,
Botanic
banyan is
Garden.
nothing. Banyan, even the one in Calcutta or Andhra Pradesh, is nothing compared to the dhaw. Nobody knows this just because that's how disconnected we are from our native species. That's what dhaw looks. That's the same forest in a different place, but this is a dhaw forest in the dry season. This is another thing we want to think about, is that to shed our obsession with the evergreen. Because the place where we live doesn't support evergreen trees. Because we live in Delhi's monsoon forest. Delhi gets a monsoon, one pulse of rain for the entire year. So that's how our trees, that's how all our plants, and that's how the people as well evolved to live there until whatever, matlab, British came, modernization, all of that. So again, we need to teach ourselves to see this as a stark kind of beauty. That's the dhaw for you. This is kumat, another tree very well adapted to growing in the Aravallis. Its seed is eaten in Rajasthan. Its gum has various uses. It can be beautiful in its own way. It's a lithophyte. Lithos is rock. Lithophyte, they love rock. They'll grow in rock. So if any of you in Vasant Kunj have been trying to plant in rock, this is one of the trees that you should go for. This is a salai. We haven't found one around Delhi, but it probably did exist at some point. Just look at its root, another lithophyte. Salai gond, salai resin, is used to make frankincense oil, which is used in dhoop, in frankincense that's burned in the church. It has various other medicinal uses. But a very, very beautiful tree. You can encounter lots in Aravali Biodiversity Park. So if dhaw likes to grow on the slope of the Aravalis, the salai grows right on top of the hill.
That's such a beautiful giant tree,
Yeah, this was a giant. When you meet a giant like this, you're just awestruck. You're in a state of reverence.
And it's also so beautiful because usually, photographs like these come only from the West. So we see redwoods and we feel, wow, matlab giant. But this is exactly what we need. We need to start recognizing our own trees, our own plants.
Yeah, very true. That's a hingot. I won't say much about it, but again, matlab. So all of these are also probably connected. These 4 or 5 trees you can see, because they send out root suckers, very hardy. Their fruit is eaten by lots of little critters like porcupines, like I think even certain kinds of deer eat their fruit. But a good tree to plant in a corner somewhere, for example, in a colony, there's an area where nobody goes. You want to plant. So this is a good tree, very hardy. That's a kankeda. Another tree, very hardy, appropriate for a kohi type area. This is in flower. I mean, all this little fuzzy stuff you see is flowers. One of the best, when I encountered this tree, I could hear it before I saw it, because it was so buzzing with bees. It was just really beautiful. That's a Care of Care Sangri fame. If any of you have been to Rajasthan, then they probably served you Care Sangri at that near Jaipur. There's that touristy place. But so this around Delhi, you see this as a bush, but this is in the desert. This is in Jaisalmer, and it's grown into a very strange-looking tree, very different.
I've only seen it as a bush, and I just assumed
Yeah,
it was a bush.
and its height is probably at least about 20 odd feet, 20 to 25 feet, somewhere in between there. So it might sound counterintuitive to the way we think about trees. We somehow think that, oh, more moisture is better. No, they grow larger where there's less moisture. Care and Jhadber as well. Both of them remain mostly bushes in and around Delhi. But as you go west into the dry desert, they turn into trees. So
That's really fascinating. Yeah.
that's Rohida, a tree more adapted to a Bangar kind of place. Deeper soils, it's not a hill tree as such, called the desert teak. Because its wood is really valued in the desert. Its flower is also stunning, and when it's in flower, you just see this color red. But this is the Barna, another good tree for either Kohi or even in a kind of Bangar. You could plant this Barna. Unfortunately, don't have a really great picture of the tree itself, but its flower is just very, very beautiful. Another tree you hear, if it's in flower, you hear it before you see it. This is your Kosam. It's been recommended by Pradeep Krishan as one of the trees that will be planted in this new central vista because of not for the flowers. What we normally think only of flowers when we think about trees and their aesthetic value, but for the value of the colors it gives when it's a new leaf. I think I'll stop here because so now Somil can talk about, so he has time to talk.
Yes. So Somil, one question I have for you, and you guys started a native plant nursery. And I'm not saying every plant is easy to grow. There's a lot that goes into growing plants. But one of the ways of bringing native plants back is if we start growing them more and more. And I started quite accidentally actually, because a few years back I saw so many Harshingar saplings had sprouted below the tree that was in my house. And I said, well, they are just going to die here, so let me pot them up and I'll give them away. And there were so many takers for it that next year I actually collected the seed and I said, okay, I'm going to collect the seed and plant it. And I was maybe lucky because Harshingar is a very forgiving tree and seed. It will just sprout anywhere. So I didn't have to do anything. But it's not the same for all of them. So yeah, tell us something more about growing native plants, which are some of the easier ones that we can grow. And I used to just collect seeds from around my place. It's actually quite astounding how many seeds you can find if you start looking. But tell us how we can all do that. I'm sure there are many people over here who have green fingers, who love growing plants, and I'm sure we can start growing some of them.
Yes. Well, I'll again switch to my presentation, but as I'm doing that, what is the first step? for growing any plant? Can someone please answer that? What is the first step?
So feel free to answer in the chat box. So Anjali says, dig a hole. Arpita says, wanting to grow it. I like that. Yeah, Manjari says, having the intent.
Right. Yes. So, of course, wanting to grow it, having the intent, but also knowing the plant and then collecting the seed. The first step is to collect the seed. Even if you don't know the plant, but you find something fascinating, if you're out just taking a walk in a forest in Delhi, you find something nice and fascinating, there's no harm in collecting the seed if you find it, because you can always find about the plant later. As Fazal said, if you don't know it, most likely it's native. But beware of the invasives, which we haven't spoken about till now, but we can talk about it a bit later. So here's Fazal collecting some Sencris seed. It's a grass. And here's again Fazal climbing. I don't know what tree that is, but he's probably collecting some seed there. So you must collect. The idea is that the fresher the seed, which means that if it has fruited the previous year, then you have the more chance of germinating it, because a lot of seeds don't survive for a long time. There are ways to make them grow for a much longer time. To make them viable for a much longer time. But you need a lot of equipment for that. You need a deep freezer. You need to basically remove the moisture from them, etc. But the trick is to get fresh seed. Or there are some plants where you can collect cuttings from. So, for example, here's the thor on the left, and on the right there's the moringa. So moringa can be done through cuttings. Thor can be done through cuttings, and a lot of plants like arni, which is a native shrub with beautiful white flowers, and attracts a lot of pollinators and bees. There's heath, which you'll find if you go on the ridge. Anywhere you'll find one of the shrub, which it's a shrub, but it also behaves like a climber. And you'll find that when you go in the dry season, most of the green you see, for example, in December or January, will be of the heath. So it's one of the shrubs that remains evergreen. It's really thorny, so be careful. But that can also be grown through cuttings. And then it's all about experimentation with the seeds, So we tried a bunch of things. We tried, on the left, you can see, I tried this at my home. So some of the seeds that are really hard coated, you might have to use a sandpaper to break the outer seed coat, to just make it thin, because it's thick and very hard. So you have to make it thin so that the moisture can actually go inside the seed, and only then it will germinate. In nature, it perhaps takes 1 year or 2 years or 3 years, but we want to fast track that process if we want to grow some of these plants. And the way to do that is either to use a sandpaper or to use boiling water. Sometimes just dropping a hard-coated seed in boiling water works also. So, yeah. So if you're
which are these hard-coated seeds?
For example, jhadber, for example, amaltas is actually fairly hard-coated.
Yeah.
Then ciris takes a while to germinate. The bigger bear, hingot, is also fairly hard-coated. So a lot of these seeds need kind of treatment if you want to fast-track their germination.
Right.
So there's a bunch of seed treatments we've tried, and we're still figuring it out, what works best for which seed, and hopefully we'll be able to put out some information about this in the years to come. But there are some plants, like on the left you can see kumat. Kumat, just soaking overnight, will sprout the seed. Just in water, it'll absorb all the moisture. On the right is khejri. Khejri also does well with 2 to 3 days of overnight soaking in warm water. So once you've figured out what seed is grown, I can tell you. So hard-coated seed is sandpaper, boiling water. Some soft seeds can do well just by overnight soaking. The trick is with really small seeds like the cutboard, Flugia, Leucopyrus, or Dhaw has really small seed. Mitragaina, Kem has really small seed. For that, you need basically growing beds, and these are basically raised beds that have been raised from the ground up to 6 inches. And I'll show you a photograph of that later. And you basically mix leaf mold in the soil, and leaf mold because in the forest, typically you would only find patte wali khaad, and that's where these seeds germinate best. It must be something to do with some microbial functions. But we don't know exactly what that is. But basically, you need leaf mold, and you mix that with the raised bed in the top layer of the soil, and you put basically just rain over that bed. For 10 minutes, just make it rain on that bed before you plant the seed, and then you just sprinkle the seed on top. You sprinkle it on top, and don't use a khurpi to mix. Just put a light layer of sand on top of it and let it be. And then water every day. And then these really small seeds will germinate like that. And then, of course, if you are growing it in packets, if you're growing it at home, the ideal packet size is the one on the left, because most of these plants which grow in semi-arid or arid regions, they send their main taproot straight down instead of wide. And that's because they want to find moisture very fast, especially in the areas of Bangar and the deep soils. They'll send their roots deep down, and you don't want your packet to be really small in height, because then the root won't be able to find enough space to go down. So we figured that this packet on the left, which is about 10 inches high and 4.5 inches wide, this packet is actually folded. The seams are inside on the side. So if you open it, the width when you open it is 4.75 inches. This packet has worked really well for us.
That's like really, really specific dimensions that I'm going to keep in mind.
Then, of course, cuttings, you use rooting hormones, then and you put a topi of of fresh gobar and soil mix on top so that it dries up. Because what we've seen is that there were times when we didn't do that, and insects really love the fresh stem cut, so they'll just bore inside the stem and completely destroy your cutting. So you must make sure that you put that topi on top, which dries out and protects your cutting.
Helmet.
Helmet.
Yes.
That's Adusa on the left, which she planted. On the right, it started germinating a couple of weeks later. Here's some experiments we ran initially when we were just, starting out, experimenting with different seeds in the nursery. It's not that technical, we realized. This looks a lot, a lot of experimentation, but it's not this technical. It's much easier than that. Basically, 3 things I told you: hard-coated seeds, very small seeds, and softer seeds.
Right. You've got Prajita in the list of seeds not to be planted. I'm disappointed.
No, that was just, I don't know why it was. Why we did that.
I just planted some today, so we'll see.
Not got to do anything with native or non-native.
Yeah.
Spacing out our planting so that we don't have too many variables.
Right, that's true.
Here's again just a way we used to do earlier about, telling our guy on ground writing in Hindi कि इस बीज को ऐसे लगाओ, एक पैकेट में इतने बीज लगाओ, because some seeds, actually it's a good practice that you plant, if you have enough seed, that you plant, and if you're planting in nursery packets, you plant at least 2 seeds of each in a packet, because if one doesn't germinate, the other will. So you have a better chance of, and if both germinate, you can just prick one out when it's about 2-3 inches high, and it's given out its first true leaf and transplanted it in another packet. So never plant just one seed. Try and plant at least two seeds in a packet. That's of course if you have liberty of having multiple seeds. And this is a kind of raised bed. It's not the best photo I had, but actually the soil has actually gone down a bit because of watering, but it's almost twice the size of what you see now, the thickness of the bed. And yeah, that's how we do our raised beds. And then we plant, whatever we plant in front, we put a tag and we put a date over there to know that this was the seed planted at this date. And if it hasn't germinated after a certain point in time, we know that it's not working and we have to try something else. Yeah, just some more photos of raised beds. That's Ketha on the left.
So why the raised bed?
So the raised bed basically helps in two ways. One is it basically helps to drain excess moisture, because when you raise a bed, the soil becomes loose. You're essentially putting in soil from the side on top of the bed, so it's loose, and it helps in draining the moisture, which is important because you don't want to flood your beds all the time. The first time you soak them in water, you soak them very well, and then you have to just maintain an optimum level of moisture. And to do that, you have to have a kind of a raised bed because that helps in draining the moisture. And secondly, it's just easier management. If you don't raise it, and you don't have a walking path next to it. So when you raise a bed on the side, because you're putting in soil from the side and putting it on top of the bed, you get a walking path automatically. So that, is just easier management. And in an ideal situation, there's something that we want to try is to actually raise the bed and make it at 4 or 5 feet above the ground, so that you don't even have to sit and work on it if you have a big nursery operation running for you. It's even easier to just stand and work and look at things closely. So that's why the raised beds. What else do we have? Yeah, this is some other experiments. Earlier, we were not able to germinate dhaw at all. And someone told us that you have to really give it good shade. And we had these just crates and some shade net lying there. So we tried this, but it did not really work very well. Just sharing some photographs. And these are some of the plants that we grew in our first year of actually planting the nursery. After the stock that you'd ordered finished off. That's Gundi on the left. On the right, there's Sesbania, Sesban. There's some Aval. On the right, you can see Ginjeri. And here's what we have today in our nursery. I can share the list with you later if you want. But it's a mix of mostly trees, some shrubs, and a few climbers. Yeah. So, that's what I want to say about growing these plants from scratch.
I mean, that was amazing information. Thank you to both of you for being, so free with sharing and, teaching us and sharing your experiences and your knowledge. And, even if we don't grow in beds, I mean, so many of us, I'm sure, I'll be trying a lot of these things. I've been waiting for today's session. I was waiting. I said, okay, I'll start my seed sowing after this, once I have a little more information. So I do it right this time. We can definitely, plant in smaller pots or these poly bags to start with, even if we don't have raised beds. And for anybody looking to make a bigger nursery, I would definitely recommend, getting in touch with Somil and Fazal and having them as consultants for your nurseries. I'm so sorry we are running out of time. I really wanted to, hear about your current plantation projects. But in the interest of time, I'm going to just read out a couple of questions, and Somil, you also have to leave. We will definitely share some resources, that we can compile from these sessions with
I'm happy to
everyone.
carry on a bit if Somil has to, matlab, if you want to
Right.
keep the session going for about
Yes.
a little longer.
So I just have like one question. Somebody asked, can we grow Vajradanti from cuttings? And there was that question about this particular plant. I'm going to share that name again. Crassula, which is a Rajasthan native plant. And,
Not sure.
somebody had trouble growing it.
The name doesn't ring a bell. Do you know the botanical name?
Shaila, if you're there, you can unmute yourself and ask that question.
Hi, I'm here. I tried to grow the crassula in my balcony, but I could not able to do it. I bought it from the nursery near the Ayanagar as well as from the Gurgaon nursery too. But it is very difficult for me. It's like after 15 to 20 days, it died, and I bought twice. It's not it is not a like low cost plant. It charges around 350 to 400 rupees. The small piece of like a small sapling kind of thing.
By
So
crassula, are you talking about a succulent?
yeah, right. It's a kind of cactus, I guess.
Yeah, those aren't native. Those aren't plants we work with. I'm not sure why it died for you. But
Because
those are strictly not native to anywhere in Asia.
okay.
Hmm.
Because these people keep crassula, but I don't know why I could not able to grow it. Like one of my friends, she lives in Malviya. Like we both of us live in Malviya Nagar. She has crassula in her balcony. She lives in E block and I live in L block, but I could not able to grow it. I don't know why it happens with me.
So Shaila, why don't you do one thing? You can share a photo of the plant and your details on our email ID. We'll pass it on to Fazal and Somil if needed, and we can have a look at the plant. And if it's not native, maybe it's not the best plant to grow. But please do share a picture, and we can get back to you on this.
What all are the plants should I grow in my balcony?
Yes.
Because I reside at Malviya.
Right. You know what, Sheila, we will be circulating a list of resources for this. I'm sorry we can't get to this question right away. I will talk to Fazal and Somil, and because we did talk about this last week as well, and we decided to put together a resource list for people, and we'll share that with you.
Sure. Thank you. Because Delhi is such a place, like after every 5 kilometers, even the range changes. So
Right.
I need your suggestions too.
Yes, we'll get back to you on this. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Somil, I think if I will not hold you much longer if you need to leave. And but
Yes.
I really, really do want to thank you because that was so wonderful. And I mean, I just learned so much. I'm so happy about that.
Thank you so much for having us, and we are happy to share whatever we know. It's not hidden information, or we don't have any copy. It's just you know. And we actually wish that more and more people, and we are really happy to share this with people because we want people to start just uh, you know loving our native plants more and growing them in whatever way they can. So it was a pleasure to share whatever we have learned so far. Yeah.
Thank you, Somil. And Fazal, if you have 5 minutes, we can, we would love to see some of the projects that you're doing right now. And, that would be a good note to end on to see, what all can be done with native plants. And then
Oh, good question. Unfortunately, we won't be able to see the projects we're on right now because I don't have images ready for that particular thing, but I can tell you a little bit about what we're doing. One of the projects we're working on, someone has about a 16-acre piece of agricultural land near the town of Neemrana, about 2 hours south west of Delhi on Jaipur Road. So their vision for the land was to develop it into a place. I mean, they told us, their words, "हाँ बस इसको जंगल बना दो." So we said, okay, but what do you mean by jungle bana do? Jungle. What do you mean by jungle? So they said, oh, मैं वहाँ बहुत सालों से चंदन उगाने की कोशिश कर रहा हूँ, मगर हो ही नहीं रहा. तो हमने कहा कि well, obviously, मतलब there's a reason for that. It's because Chandan is from a much more moist place. Now, the place we're talking about in Neemrana is more or less on the edge of the desert. The Aravallis are the edge of, in some sense, the desert that gets drier and drier as you go west in Rajasthan. So it's just the beginning of the desert. So the soils there on his piece of land, we found once we started studying the land and finding out. So the first step was, okay, what does jungle mean in this context? So our first step was to figure out like what actually grows in the wild in this particular kind of soil type with this rainfall and this topography in this land form. And so the soil there was very sandy. So we did some background reading. We checked there are actually these soil maps that each state government releases. There are hydrogeological maps. What we found is that our soil was most likely what's called aeolian soil. Now, aeolian soil is wind brought. So winds from Rajasthan have over thousands of years brought sandy soil and kind of collected it against the Aravallis and formed its own unique kind of habitat. So we did a lot of roaming around in foresty areas nearby, whatever remains. We talked to experts like Pradeep Krishan. We studied their new work in a park like Kishan Bagh, which is coming up in Jaipur. And what we found there is that the ecology here would be something like what you find in the sandy plains of Rajasthan, which is generally speaking. So it's actually a shrubland. It's not at all a canopy forest. The trees are spaced out a lot, and in between there are lots of very beautiful shrubs. So that's what we've been doing over these last 2 years is this research and learning, but also collecting lots of seed, putting it in the ground. This last year we focused on grasses. We're trying to get a lot of grasses in there. Yeah, and also rock. So the idea is also that we're making it, and it's not just ki jungle bana do, matlab it's plant anything, anywhere, in any density. No. As much as possible, one of our main objectives is to make it interesting and aesthetically appealing. So we really think carefully about the way a landscape designer would think about which plants would look good where. But the primary criteria to decide those plants is, of course, the ecology.
Yeah, that really is, I think that really is and was the highlight of our talk today, to really think about ecology, the space we have, the context, understand the site, the soil, the area, and understand the plants, and then, grow the plants accordingly. And in the interest of time, and because people are dropping off like flies now, I think it's a good time to end the session here. We can go on talking like for hours, and we'll get back. There were a few questions on the chat that we couldn't get to, but
Mr. VP Rao.
Yeah, he messaged me. He said, it was a really great session. So I will get in touch with you and Somil to get the answers to these questions, and we will definitely, reply back to everyone with their questions. I think that really is the highlight. And I just want to say thank you so much, Fazal. I learned about Delhi's ecologies and microhabitats today, and I saw such beautiful photos that I had never, that is the habitat. I had never imagined that could be the kind of habitat that probably existed here at one point, So really, thank you for sharing all of that with us. And yes.
May I request all of you, invite you for a visit to the woods, which is very close to Akshardham temple. You have been there. I'm VP Rao.
Yes, sir. We will drop by. I will definitely share your contact. And he picked up a lot of beautiful native plants from the Edible Roots nursery a couple of months back, and they've planted them, and it's just an amazing space now.
Oh, lovely.
Yeah.
Fazal, Mr. Fazal.
Yes.
And Mr. Daga, I request all of you to just visit once and give us suggestions.
We will come.
Professor C.R. Babu had been here once, and I would request you people who are highly knowledgeable about the forestry, please do visit us, advise us.
Yes.
Over a cup of tea, of course.
Oh, then we'll surely come.
Thank you.
Thank you everyone for staying on till the end, and thank you so much once again to Fazal and Somil, and to Fawzia, Khushbu, and everyone on the Wiki team for providing all the support and organizing this wonderful session. Thanks a lot, Fazal and Somil.
Thank you.
And
thank you.
We will continue this conversation.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Vallari. I think for starting this series of conversation on native trees of Delhi. Often we are and disinformed about natives. Something we have been growing for many, many years, like 2-3 decades, and we think that probably these are the natives. And I think I personally learned a lot today. Also, I learned about 3 things: Bangar, Khadar, and Kohi. So, I did my PhD research at Madanpur Khadar, little knowing that what Khadar really means, like it's the new alluvium and the old alluvium. So thank you so much for introducing us to that. A lot of things, how to process seeds, how to grow. I think it's been a phenomenal learning for all of us. Thank you, Fazal. Thank you, Somil. Thanks, Vallari. And this must go on because I think we really need to take it forward to a lot of people. Thanks a lot. And have a great week ahead. I know it's Sunday, the weekend is ending. So enjoy yourself. Happy planting.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.